Clara heard the growl before she saw the blood on the grass. It was almost dark, and she was pulling her flower cart down the narrow path behind the market when a small shadow darted in front of her wheel. She stopped hard, her heart slamming against her chest. Then she heard it again, a soft, pained whimper coming from inside her own cart, right under the pile of unsold roses and lilies she had not managed to sell that day. She looked around. The street was empty. The lanterns outside the market stalls were being put out one by one, and the last few sellers were packing up for the night. Nobody else seemed to notice anything strange. Clara crouched beside her cart and slowly lifted the corner of the cloth she used to cover her flowers from the wind. 3 small shapes were pressed together in the narrow space, shaking. At first, she thought they were dogs, but their fur was too thick, their eyes too sharp, from too aware. Wolf pups, real, living wolf pups, hiding in her flower cart as if their lives depended on it. One of them had a cut along its side. Another was breathing too fast, its ribs moving in short, frightened bursts. Clara's first instinct was fear. Everyone in her village had grown up hearing stories about the wolves that ruled the dark forest beyond the hills. The shifter kingdom, nobody from the human village dared enter. But fear did not stay long in her chest. It was replaced almost instantly by something stronger, something that had guided her whole life since she lost her parents years ago. The simple, stubborn need to help anything that was suffering in front of her. "Shh," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder again. "Nobody is going to hurt you. Not while I'm here." She did not know if the pups understood her, but the smallest one, the one with a torn ear, pressed its nose against her hand and did not pull away. That was enough for Clara. She quickly rearranged the flowers to hide the pups completely, threw the old cloth back over the top, and began pushing the cart faster than she ever had, her arms straining, sweat forming on her back despite the cool evening air. She lived alone in a small wooden house at the very edge of the village, close enough to the tree line that most of her neighbors thought she was foolish for staying there. It was the house her father built before he died, and she refused to leave it, no matter how many times people warned her about the forest and the things that were said to live inside it. Tonight, for the first time, she understood why people were afraid. When she reached her home, she pulled the cart inside quickly and shut the door, sliding the wooden bar across it. Only then did she pull back the cloth again. The 3 pups blinked up at her, under the weak light of her single oil lamp. They were far too thin, and now that she could see them clearly, she noticed the burns on one of their legs, the kind of mark left by fire, not by nature. Someone had hurt them. Someone had chased them. And now they had chosen her flower cart, of all the places in the village, as their hiding spot. "Okay," Clara said softly, more to herself than to the pups. "Okay, let's get you cleaned up." She spent the next hour boiling water, tearing clean strips of cloth, and gently washing the wounds with a mixture of herbs her mother had once taught her to use for cuts and fevers. The pups whimpered but did not fight her, as though some instinct told them she meant no harm. By the time she finished, all 3 were curled together near the small fire, finally breathing slowly and evenly for the first time since she found them. She sat back against the wall and studied them in the dim light. There was something strange about the way they watched her, an intelligence that did not seem to belong to ordinary animals. One of them, the largest of the 3, kept glancing toward the door every few minutes, as if waiting for danger to walk through it. Clara did not know it yet, but she was right to notice that fear. Somewhere far beyond the tree line, in a stone hall lit by torches and shadowed by grief, a king was tearing his own kingdom apart, searching for these very pups. Cale Draven had not slept in 3 nights. The Alpha King of the Northern Wolf Kingdom stood at the center of his war room, his hands pressed flat against a long wooden table, covered in maps and reports, most of them useless, all of them repeating the same terrible truth. His 3 sons were missing, and no one could tell him where. 3 nights ago, an attack had been launched on the royal nursery. It had been fast and well planned, carried out while most of the guards were distracted by a false alarm at the northern gate. By the time Cale reached the nursery himself, the nurse who cared for his sons was gone, and so were the boys. All that remained was a torn blanket, a scattering of broken furniture, and the unmistakable scent of an enemy pack mixed with fear and smoke. His generals believed the boys were dead. Cale refused to believe it. A father does not stop searching simply because hope becomes difficult to hold. "There is a scent trail," said Edmund. his oldest and most trusted advisor, stepping into the room with a folded map in his hand. It leads toward the human border. It is faint, but it is there. Cale's head snapped up. The border? Why would they run toward the humans? Perhaps they did not run, Edmund said carefully. Perhaps they were fleeing whatever attacked the palace, and the border was simply the safest direction. Young pups in danger will run from fear, not from strategy. Cale straightened, something sharp and desperate lighting in his chest. Then we search every inch of that border. Every village, every road. My king, Edmund said, his voice lower now, more careful. If we send warriors marching into human territory, it will look like an invasion. It could start a war we are not prepared for, especially while our own court is compromised from within. Someone help the attackers get past our guards. We do not yet know who. Cale's jaw tightened. He hated how much sense that made. Then I will go myself. Alone, or with only a small guard, quietly. You are the king, Edmund said. You cannot simply... I am also their father, Cale said, and the words came out low and rough, cutting off any argument before it could form. I raised those boys myself, after their mother died, bringing them into this world. I will not sit on a throne while they are lost somewhere, hurt, frightened, calling for someone who is not coming. Edmund studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He had served 2 kings in his life, and had never seen either of them look the way Cale looked now, hollowed out by fear disguised as fury. Then let me come with you, Edmund said. Disguised, as you say. We will need a reason to move freely along the border without drawing suspicion. Cale looked down at the map again, at the winding road that connected the Wolf Kingdom's forest to the small human village nestled at its edge. A market town, according to the notes scrawled beside it, known mostly for trade in grain, cloth, and flowers. Then we will be traders, Cale said quietly. We will walk through every street of that village until I find them, even if it takes searching every last stall in that market myself. He did not know it yet, but one particular stall, a flower cart pushed by a young woman with tired eyes and gentle hands, already held the answer he was searching for. The next morning, Clara woke to find all 3 pups still curled together near the cold ashes of her fire, but the smallest one, the one with the torn ear, had crawled closer to her during the night, and now slept pressed against her side. She smiled despite herself, despite the exhaustion still weighing on her shoulders, despite the questions circling endlessly in her mind. Where had they come from? Who had hurt them? And most importantly, what was she supposed to do with 3 wolf pups in a human village, where most people feared and hated anything connected to the shifter kingdoms? She could not keep them hidden forever. She also could not simply abandon them, not after everything she had seen in their eyes the night before. For now, she decided, she would care for them quietly, feed them, let their wounds heal, and figure out the rest later. She had survived worse uncertainties than this. She rose carefully, trying not to disturb the pups, and began preparing for the day. She still had flowers to sell, bills to pay, and a life to keep running, even with a secret now living beneath her floorboards. As she loaded fresh blooms into her cart that morning, roses she had cut just after sunrise, tall stems of lavender, and a few late-blooming daisies, she glanced back toward the small house one last time. The pups were awake now, watching her through the gap in the door she had left cracked open for air. Behave, she whispered, only half joking. I will be back before the sun sets. She pushed her cart toward the market, unaware that somewhere on that same road, a man disguised as a simple trader was walking closer to her every hour, following a trail that grew stronger the nearer he came to her home. The market was busier than usual that day, filled with the noise of bargaining voices, the smell of fresh bread from the baker's stall, and children running between the crowds chasing each other with wooden toys. Clara set up her cart in her usual spot near the well, arranging her flowers carefully, calling out gentle offers to passing customers the way she always did. By midday, she had sold nearly half her stock, enough to feel a small sense of relief settle into her chest. She was reaching for a bundle of white lilies to hand to an older woman when she noticed a stranger standing near the edge of the market, watching her. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp eyes that seemed too still for the busy noise around him. He wore simple traveling clothes, nothing that marked him as wealthy or important, Yet something about the way he carried himself made Clara's skin prickle with awareness. He did not look like the farmers or merchants who usually pass through. He looked like someone pretending very carefully to be ordinary. She told herself it was nothing, and returned to her customers. But the stranger did not leave. He waited until the crowd around her thinned slightly, then approached her cart with slow, deliberate steps. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice low and steady. "Are these grown locally?" "Yes," Clara answered, glancing up briefly before returning her attention to arranging her flowers. "Most of them are from my own garden, just behind my house near the forest edge." Something flickered across the stranger's face at the mention of the forest. Though it vanished so quickly, Clara almost missed it. "I will take them," he said. "All of them." Clara blinked, certain she had misheard him. "All of them? Sir, I have quite a lot left today." "That is fine," he said, reaching into a pouch at his side and placing far more coins on her cart than the flowers were worth. "I would like every bouquet you have." Clara stared at the coins, then at the man, confusion and hesitant excitement warring inside her. No customer had ever bought her entire stock in one purchase before, not even during the busiest festival days. "That is very generous of you," she said carefully, still studying him. "May I ask why?" For a moment, the stranger seemed to search for an answer, his sharp eyes moving briefly toward the direction of the forest path leading toward her home, before returning to her face. "I find that flowers grown near old forests," he said slowly, "often carry something the market ones do not. Something worth paying for." Clara did not fully understand what he meant, but she smiled politely, and began wrapping every remaining bouquet for him, unaware that the man standing before her was not simply a wealthy trader indulging a strange preference. He was the alpha king of the wolf kingdom, and the scent clinging faintly to her clothes, a scent she could not smell but he could detect as clearly as smoke in the wind, told him everything he needed to know. His sons were close, and this quiet, kind flower seller was somehow connected to where they were hiding. Cale carried the bundle of flowers back through the market with careful, measured steps, forcing himself not to react to the storm of relief, and fury, and desperate hope crashing through his chest all at once. Every instinct in him wanted to demand answers from her immediately, to shake the truth out of anyone standing between him and his sons. But something about her, the gentle way she had spoken to her customers, the tired kindness in her eyes, made him hesitate. If she was hiding his sons deliberately, working with whoever had attacked the palace, then confronting her directly would give her time to disappear, to move the pups somewhere he could not follow. And if she was innocent, if she had simply found 3 frightened pups and taken them in without knowing what they truly were, then frightening her now could put all of their lives in even greater danger. He needed to be patient. He needed to watch, to learn, to make certain before he acted. He found Edmund waiting near the edge of the market, leaning against a low stone wall with practiced patience. "Well?" Edmund asked quietly as Cale approached. "Their scent is on her," Cale said, his voice tight with restrained emotion. "Faint, but unmistakable. She lives near the forest edge, past the last row of houses." Edmund's eyes widened slightly. "Then we move tonight." "No," Cale said firmly. "Not yet. If she is protecting them, we do this carefully. I will return to her cart. I will learn more about her home, about who else might know what she is hiding. We cannot risk startling her into running, or worse, drawing the attention of whoever attacked the nursery in the first place." Edmund studied him for a long moment, clearly torn between agreeing with the caution and wanting to charge toward the forest edge immediately. "You care about being careful with her," Edmund said slowly, "more than you would with an ordinary suspect." Cale did not answer immediately. He looked down at the flowers in his arms, roses and lilies and sprigs of lavender, purchased with a desperation that had nothing to do with their beauty. "She fed and healed something broken, without asking for anything in return," Cale said quietly. "Whatever she is involved in, I do not believe she meant harm to my sons, but I will not risk their safety on a feeling alone." That evening, Clara returned home exhausted, but lighter than she had felt in months, her pouch heavier with coins than it had ever been after a single market day. She still did not fully understand the strange, generous stranger who had purchased every flower she owned, but she was too tired and too relieved to question her good fortune for long. When she opened her door, The three pups rushed toward her immediately, tails wagging, small bodies pressing eagerly against her legs. She laughed softly, kneeling down to greet them properly, running her hands gently over their healing wounds. "You are looking much better," she murmured, scratching behind the torn ear of the smallest pup. "All three of you." She fed them scraps of meat she had purchased on her way home, sat with them by the fire as the evening grew dark, and allowed herself, for the first time since finding them, to imagine a future where she might actually be able to keep them safe. She had no way of knowing that outside, hidden carefully among the trees at the edge of the forest, a pair of sharp eyes watched her small house long into the night, studying every window, every sound, every flicker of movement inside. Cale did not approach, not yet. He simply watched, memorizing the shape of her home, the rhythm of her routine, waiting for the right moment to learn the full truth. Somewhere deep within him, beneath the fear and the fury, and the desperate need to hold his sons again, something else had begun to stir as well, quiet and unfamiliar, a feeling he did not have time to examine closely. Not tonight. Tonight, all that mattered was that his sons were close, alive, and cared for by a woman who did not yet know she had already changed everything. The next few days settled into a strange, careful rhythm neither Clara nor Cale fully understood yet. Every morning, Clara pushed her cart to the market, arranged her flowers, and waited for customers. And every morning, the same tall stranger appeared, purchasing every bouquet she had before midday arrived. At first she assumed it was simply generous luck, the kind of fortune that sometimes visits struggling sellers without explanation. But by the third day, she began to notice small details that made her curiosity sharpen. He always asked about her garden, always steered the conversation gently toward her home, her land, the forest bordering her property. He never asked anything that felt threatening, yet the pattern of his questions felt deliberate, like a man carefully building a map inside his mind. She should have been afraid. Instead, she found herself oddly comfortable in his presence, drawn to the quiet intensity in his eyes, and the careful way he listened to everything she said, as though her words mattered more than she could understand. "You are very interested in flowers for a trader," she said one afternoon, handing him a bundle of white roses. "I am interested in many things," he replied simply, "that grow where people believe nothing good can survive." Clara tilted her head, studying him. "That is a strange thing to say about flowers." "Perhaps," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly, the closest thing to a smile she had seen from him. "Or perhaps I simply mean what I say." She did not understand him fully, but something about his words settled warmly in her chest, staying with her long after he disappeared back into the crowd. Back at her home each evening, the pups continued to heal and grow stronger, their playful energy returning bit by bit. She noticed small, strange things about them too, things she tried not to dwell on too deeply. The way they seemed to understand her words far too clearly for ordinary animals. The way the largest pup would sit by the window each evening, staring toward the forest with an expression that looked almost like longing. She told herself she was imagining things, that exhaustion and stress were shaping strange thoughts in her tired mind. But deep down, a quiet voice warned her that the truth about these three small creatures was far larger and far more dangerous than she had allowed herself to consider. That warning would prove correct far sooner than she expected, because far beyond the market and the flower cart and the quiet nights by her fire, the enemies who had once torn apart a royal nursery had picked up a scent of their own, one leading straight toward the small wooden house at the edge of the forest. Time was running out for all of them, and none of them yet realized it. Garrick stood at the edge of a ridge overlooking the human village, his claws digging into the bark of the tree beside him, his eyes narrowed against the setting sun. He was the leader of the pack that had stormed the royal nursery 3 nights ago, though few outside his closest circle knew his name or his face. For years he had waited patiently, building alliances within the Wolf Kingdom's own court, planting doubt and division among Cale Draven's advisors, waiting for the perfect moment to strike at the heart of the royal bloodline. The attack had gone almost perfectly. Almost. The pups had escaped. It should have been simple. 3 small, defenseless creatures, barely old enough to understand danger, let alone outrun it. Yet somehow, in the chaos of smoke and fallen furniture, they had slipped through a gap in the palace wall and vanished into the forest before his warriors could catch them. For 3 days, his trackers had searched every corner of wolf territory without success. It was only this morning that one of his scouts returned with a report that made Garrick's blood run hot with renewed purpose. A scent trail, faint but real, leading toward the human border, toward a small village known for nothing more than simple trade and quiet farms. "You are certain," Garrick said, his voice low and dangerous, without turning to look at the scout kneeling behind him. "Yes, my lord," the scout answered, his head bowed. "The trail leads to a house at the edge of the village, near the tree line. A woman lives there, a flower seller." Garrick's lips curled into something that was not quite a smile. A human, hiding the heirs of the throne, without even realizing what she holds in her hands. How amusing. "Shall we move against her immediately?" "No," Garrick said after a moment of consideration. "Not yet. If the king's men are also searching, and I suspect they are, then a clumsy attack could draw unwanted attention before we are ready to claim what we came for. We watch first. We learn her patterns, her defenses, the shape of her home. Then, when the moment is right, we take the pups quietly, and no one will even know they were there until it is far too late to stop us." He turned then, finally, his sharp eyes gleaming in the fading light. "Send 2 of our best trackers to watch the house from the forest side, report back everything they see, and make certain," he added, his voice dropping lower, "that they are not the only ones watching." Unbeknownst to Garrick, his instincts were correct. Cale's own scouts, quiet and disciplined, had already begun a careful watch over Clara's home from the opposite side of the property, hidden among the thick trees where neither human nor careless wolf would think to look. 2 forces, each with very different intentions, now circled the same small house, waiting, watching, and preparing to move. Clara, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the danger gathering around her, occupied instead with the simple, comforting rhythm of caring for 3 growing pups who had somehow become the center of her entire world in less than a week. She had begun teaching them small tricks, mostly out of boredom during the quiet evening hours, and had been surprised at how quickly they understood her, responding to simple words and gestures with an intelligence that continued to unsettle her in ways she could not fully explain. "Sit," she said one evening, holding a small piece of dried meat above the largest pup's head. To her astonishment, the pup sat immediately, its tail thumping against the wooden floor, its dark eyes fixed eagerly on the treat in her hand. "Good boy," she laughed, handing over the reward. "You are far too smart for an ordinary pup, you know that?" The pup simply tilted its head, as though it understood exactly what she meant, and found the observation mildly amusing. She had started calling them by simple names, unable to keep referring to them, as though they were nameless creatures sharing her home. The largest, boldest one she called Rowan, for his steady, watchful nature. The smallest, the one with the torn ear, who had claimed her side as his favorite sleeping spot, she called Finn. The third, quieter and more thoughtful than his brothers, she named Oscar. She had no way of knowing how close she had come to guessing correctly, that these were in fact the very names given to them at birth by a father who now searched for them every single day, disguised as a humble flower buyer wandering through her market stall. The following morning, as Clara prepared her cart for another day of selling, she noticed something that made her pause. A patch of grass near the edge of her garden had been disturbed, flattened in a way that did not match the pup's usual play, and a faint, unfamiliar scent lingered in the morning air, sharp and cold in a way she could not name but instinctively distrusted. She glanced toward Rowan, who stood frozen near the disturbed grass, his ears pressed flat against his head, a low, barely audible growl rumbling in his throat. "What is it?" she whispered, crouching beside him. Rowan did not answer, of course, but the tension radiating from his small body told her everything she needed to know. Something had been near her home during the night, something that made even a wolf pup afraid. She decided, reluctantly, that she needed to be more careful, though she still did not fully understand what threat she might be facing. She reinforced the latch on her door before leaving for the market that morning, checked the perimeter of her small garden twice, and found herself glancing over her shoulder more often than usual as she walked the familiar path into town. At the market, the tall stranger arrived at his usual time, purchasing his usual bundle of flowers, though today his eyes seemed sharper, more watchful than before, scanning the crowd around them with a wariness that mirrored her own unease. "You seem troubled," he said quietly, studying her face as she wrapped his flowers. Clara hesitated, unsure how much to share with a man she barely knew, yet something about his steady presence made the words slip out before she could stop them. "I found strange tracks near my home this morning," she admitted, "and my dog, well, he seemed frightened by something in the night." Something shifted behind the stranger's eyes, a flicker of alarm quickly masked beneath careful calm. "A dog," he repeated slowly. "Just the one?" "3, actually," Clara said, then immediately wondered why she had shared such a specific detail with a stranger. "Strays I found and decided to care for. Foolish of me, probably, given how little I have to spare." "Not foolish," the stranger said, his voice softer now, almost gentle. "Kind. There is very little difference between the two, most days, except in how the world chooses to reward them." Clara studied him carefully, struck once again by the strange depth in his words, the sense that he was speaking about something far larger than a simple conversation about stray animals. "Be careful tonight," he added, before turning to leave, his tone suddenly urgent despite his attempt to keep it casual. "If you notice anything unusual again, anything at all, do not investigate it alone. Lock your doors and trust your instincts." He disappeared into the crowd before she could ask him what he meant, leaving her standing beside her cart, with a growing sense of unease settling deep into her chest. That night, as promised, Clara locked every door and window in her small home, gathered the 3 pups close beside the fire, and tried to convince herself that the strange warning had simply been the concern of a kind stranger, nothing more. But outside, hidden among the trees, 2 sets of eyes watched her house with very different intentions. Garrick's trackers, patient and calculating, studying the patterns of light behind her windows. And further back, deeper in the shadows, Cale's own scouts, equally watchful, equally aware that the enemy had finally found what they had been searching for. The pieces were finally moving into place, and soon, very soon, the quiet, careful watching would no longer be enough to keep the small house and everyone inside it safe. The scream came just after midnight, sharp and sudden, cutting through the quiet forest like a blade through silk. Clara jolted awake, her heart pounding, before her mind even caught up with what had happened. The 3 pups were already on their feet, standing rigid near the door, their small bodies trembling with a mixture of fear and fierce, protective instinct that seemed far too large for their size. She grabbed the old iron poker from beside her fireplace, the only weapon she owned, and crept toward the window, peering through the gap in the curtain with shaking hands. At first, she saw nothing but darkness and the faint outline of trees swaying gently in the night wind. Then, movement. A shape, low and fast, darting between the trunks at the edge of her garden, followed almost immediately by another, larger shape, crashing through the underbrush in pursuit. Something was happening in her forest, something violent and urgent, and she had no idea whether it was moving toward her home or simply passing through on its way to somewhere else entirely. Rowan let out a low, warning growl, positioning himself directly between Clara and the door, his small body puffed up as large as it could manage. Finn pressed close against her legs, whimpering softly, while Oscar remained near the window, watching the darkness outside with an intensity that seemed far too focused for a creature his size. "Stay close," Clara whispered, though she was not entirely certain if she was speaking to the pups or simply trying to steady her own racing thoughts. The sounds outside grew louder, closer, a mixture of snarling and heavy movement that made her blood run cold. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went silent. The silence was somehow worse than the noise. Clara stood frozen near the window for what felt like an eternity, straining to hear any hint of movement, any sign of what had happened in the darkness beyond her small home. Finally, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, she made a decision that she knew was reckless, even as she made it. She unlatched the door. "Wait here," she told the pups firmly, though she doubted they would actually listen. "I need to see what happened." She stepped out into the cold night air, poker held tightly in both hands, her bare feet silent against the damp grass. The moon offered just enough light to see by, casting long, uncertain shadows across her small garden. She moved carefully toward the tree line, her breath coming in short, controlled bursts, every instinct in her body screaming that this was a terrible idea. She found him near the edge of the forest, half hidden beneath a fallen branch, blood staining the grass beneath him. It was the tall stranger from the market. Clara's poker clattered to the ground as she rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside him, her hands hovering uncertainly over wounds she had no idea how to treat. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but steady, and there was something strange about the wound itself. Deep claw marks that no ordinary animal in this region could have made. "Please," she whispered, though she was not entirely certain who she was pleading with. "Please be alive." His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening the moment they landed on her face. "Clara," he said, her name rough and strained on his lips, though she was certain she had never told him her name at the market. She had no time to question that strange detail. "I need to get you inside. Can you stand?" With considerable effort, and no small amount of pain clearly written across his face, the stranger managed to rise, leaning heavily on her shoulder, as she guided him back toward her small home. By the time they reached the door, the three pups had gathered close together just inside, watching the stranger with wide, unblinking eyes. The moment he crossed the threshold, something extraordinary happened. Rowan let out a sound that was not quite a bark and not quite a cry, something closer to recognition, and rushed forward, pressing himself against the stranger's legs with desperate, overwhelming relief. Finn and Oscar followed immediately after, all three pups crowding around him, as though greeting someone they had feared they might never see again. Clara stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the scene before her, with growing confusion and dawning suspicion. "You know them," she said slowly. "You know my dogs." The stranger looked down at the three pups pressed against him, then up at Clara, his expression a complicated mixture of exhaustion, relief, and something that looked remarkably like guilt. "Clara," he said quietly, "there is something I need to tell you, and I am afraid it is going to be very difficult to believe." She helped him to a chair near the fire, cleaning his wounds with hands that trembled only slightly now, her mind racing through a dozen impossible explanations for what she had just witnessed. "Start talking," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "Now." He was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts, before finally speaking. "My name is Kale," he said, "and those three creatures you have been caring for are not ordinary pups. They are shifters, born of the wolf kingdom beyond that forest, and they are my sons." Clara's hands stilled against the cloth she had been pressing to his side. "Your sons," she repeated flatly, certain she must have misunderstood him somehow. "3 nights before you found them," Kale continued, his voice steady, despite the pain evident in his eyes, "our palace was attacked. My sons were taken from their nursery during the chaos, and somehow, in the confusion, they managed to escape into the forest alone. I have been searching for them ever since, disguised as a simple trader, following their scent until it led me to your market stall. That is why you kept buying my flowers," Clara said slowly, pieces beginning to fall into place with dizzying speed. "You could smell them on me." "Yes," Kale admitted. "I am sorry for the deception. I needed to be certain of your intentions before revealing the truth, for their safety and yours." Clara looked down at the three pups, still pressed close against Kale's legs, her mind struggling to reconcile the small, playful creatures she had grown to love with the idea that they were something far more extraordinary than she had ever imagined. "And tonight," she said slowly, "whatever attacked you in the forest, that was connected to whoever took them in the first place." Kale's expression darkened. "Yes, I believe the same enemies who orchestrated the original attack have traced their scent here as well. I came tonight intending only to watch your home from a distance, to ensure they were not already under threat. Instead, I found myself ambushed by 2 of their trackers before I could return to warn you." "You fought them off," Clara said, glancing at his wounds with new understanding. "I fought them off," he confirmed grimly, "but they escaped before I could learn anything useful. And I have no doubt they will report back to whoever sent them. Which means, Clara, that your home is no longer safe. Not for you, and certainly not for my sons." Clara felt the weight of his words settle heavily in her chest. Everything she thought she understood about her quiet, simple life had shifted dramatically in the span of a single conversation. Yet somehow, staring at the 3 pups she had come to love so quickly, she found she could not regret a single moment of the choice she had made to hide them. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Kale studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his sharp eyes. Now, he said, I need you to trust me, fully, and without hesitation, because the safety of my sons, and yours, depends entirely on the choices we make in the next few hours. Clara looked between the man before her, wounded but resolute, and the 3 pups who had somehow become her whole world in less than a week, and made a decision that would change the course of her entire life. Tell me what you need me to do, she said. Outside, hidden once more among the shadows of the forest, the 2 trackers who had fled from Kale's fury regrouped at a safe distance, nursing their own injuries, and preparing to deliver news to their leader that would set the next stage of their plan into motion, far sooner than anyone inside that small house could have anticipated. The Alpha King had been found, and so, by extension, had his sons. There was no more time left for careful watching. The final confrontation, one that would determine the fate of an entire kingdom, had already begun. By the time the sun rose, Clara's small home had transformed into something closer to a fortress than the quiet cottage she had known her entire life. Kale, despite his wounds, had spent the remaining hours of darkness reinforcing the windows and door as best he could, while explaining, in careful, measured detail, exactly what they were facing. Clara listened with growing understanding as he described Garrick, the ambitious leader responsible for the attack on the palace, and his desperate, calculated attempt to eliminate the rightful heirs before they could ever grow old enough to challenge his claim to power. He will not stop searching, Kale said, pacing slowly, despite the stiffness in his side, not until my sons are either recovered safely, or he succeeds in silencing them permanently. Clara glanced toward the 3 pups, now curled together near the fire, finally resting after the chaos of the night before. It was strange to look at them now, knowing what she knew, seeing not simple stray animals but 3 young lives, carrying the weight of an entire kingdom's future. They still cannot shift back, she observed quietly. Even after everything, they are still trapped in this form. Fear does that to very young shifters, Kale explained, his voice softening as he watched his sons sleep. The trauma of the attack, combined with their age, has left them unable to control the change back to their human forms. It may take time, patience, and above all, a sense of safety, before they are ready to try again. Then we give them that, Clara said simply, as though the answer were the most obvious thing in the world. Whatever it takes. Kale turned to study her fully then, something warm and grateful shifting behind his tired eyes. You barely know me, or them, truly. Yet you continue to offer everything you have without hesitation. I know enough, Clara said, meeting his gaze steadily. I know that 3 frightened creatures chose my flower cart out of every hiding place in that market, and I know that whatever happens next, I could not simply walk away now, even if I wanted to. Something passed between them in that quiet moment, unspoken but undeniable, a connection neither of them had expected to form in the middle of such danger and uncertainty. Their moment was interrupted by Edmund's arrival at the door, disguised once again as a simple traveling merchant, though his sharp eyes immediately took in Kale's injuries with barely concealed alarm. My king, Edmund said, stepping quickly inside once Clara ushered him in. I came as soon as I heard rumors of a disturbance near the forest edge last night. Are you? I am well enough, Kale interrupted, though his grimace suggested otherwise. Garrick's trackers found me before I could return to warn Clara properly. They know now, Edmund. They know where my sons are hiding. Edmund's face paled slightly as he absorbed the implications of that statement. Then we must move them immediately, back to the palace where proper guards can protect them. They cannot travel yet, Clara interjected before Kale could respond. Kale's wounds need more time to heal, and the pups themselves are barely recovered from their own injuries. A hurried journey now could put all of them at even greater risk. Edmund glanced between Clara and Kale, clearly surprised by the easy familiarity already present between them, though he wisely chose not to comment on it directly. Then what do you propose? He asked instead. Kale considered the question carefully before answering. We reinforce this location as best we can, quietly, without drawing further attention. Bring in additional guards disguised as village workers, farmers, laborers, anyone who can blend naturally into this community, while watching for signs of Garrick's forces. We buy ourselves time to heal, and to plan a safer route back to the palace once everyone is strong enough to travel. And if Garrick attacks before we are ready? Edmund asked grimly. Cale's expression hardened with quiet, determined resolve. Then we will defend this house with everything we have, and we will not fail them again. Over the following days, the small village around Clara's home slowly transformed, though only the most observant eyes would have noticed the change. A new farmhand appeared at the property next door, his movements too precise, too watchful to belong to an ordinary laborer. A traveling merchant set up a small stall near the edge of the market, close enough to Clara's usual spot to notice anyone paying unusual attention to her comings and goings. Even Meg, Clara's closest friend in the village, found herself unknowingly recruited as an additional set of watchful eyes, though she remained blissfully unaware of the true reason behind Clara's sudden increase in visitors. "You have gained quite a few new friends lately," Meg observed one afternoon, watching curiously as another unfamiliar face passed by Clara's cart with a polite nod. "Should I be worried, or simply curious?" "Curious, mostly," Clara said, offering a small, tired smile. "Though I promise to explain everything, eventually, when the time is right." Meg studied her closely, clearly sensing there was far more happening beneath the surface than Clara was willing to share, but she trusted her friend enough not to push further. Back at the house each evening, Clara continued caring for the three pups, watching with quiet hope as their wounds healed and their playful energy slowly returned. She spent hours simply sitting with them, speaking softly, offering the same gentle patience and comfort she had shown them since the very first night she found them hiding in her flower cart. Cale, recovering steadily under her careful attention, found himself watching these quiet moments with a growing sense of wonder he had not expected to feel. He had spent so many years as a fierce, guarded ruler, hardened by loss and responsibility, that he had almost forgotten what genuine warmth and unguarded kindness looked like. Watching Clara with his sons reminded him painfully, beautifully, of exactly what he had almost lost. "You are staring again," Clara said one evening, without looking up from where she sat brushing dirt from Oscar's fur. Cale, caught off guard, allowed himself a rare, small smile. "Forgive me, it has been a long time since I have seen my sons this at ease with anyone outside our immediate family." "They trust easily," Clara said, though the warmth in her voice suggested she understood the comment meant something deeper than simple observation. "Perhaps they take after their father in that regard." Cale's smile widened slightly, though a flicker of old grief passed briefly behind his eyes. Their mother, actually. She had a way of making even the most guarded hearts feel safe. Clara glanced up at him then, something gentle and understanding passing between them. "I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Cale said quietly. "It has been many years now, but the ache remains, in its own way. Though lately," he added, his gaze drifting briefly toward her before returning to his sons, "I find myself remembering what it feels like to hope for good things again." The quiet moment stretched between them, warm and fragile, until Rowan suddenly barked sharply, drawing both of their attention toward the window. Outside, in the fading evening light, one of the disguised guards Cale had positioned near the property was gesturing urgently toward the tree line, his expression tense with unmistakable alarm. Whatever peace they had managed to build over the past several days, it seemed, was about to be tested far sooner than either of them had hoped. Cale was outside before Clara could even reach for the door, moving with the fluid, dangerous grace of a warrior despite his still healing wounds. She followed close behind, her heart pounding, the three pups pressed anxiously against her legs as they crossed the threshold together. The disguised guard, a broad-shouldered man named Doran who had spent the last several days posing as a farmhand at the neighboring property, met them halfway across the garden, his voice low and urgent. "Movement in the trees, my king," Doran reported quickly. "At least 4, possibly more. They have been circling the property for the better part of an hour, staying just far enough back to avoid detection by ordinary means." Cale's expression hardened instantly, every trace of the gentle warmth Clara had witnessed moments earlier, replaced by fierce, focused readiness. "Garrick's trackers. Or worse," Doran added grimly. "Garrick himself, perhaps, growing impatient with his scout's failures." Cale turned to Clara, his voice steady, despite the tension radiating from his entire body. "Take the boys inside. Bar the door, and stay away from the windows. Whatever happens outside, Do not come out until I tell you it is safe. Clara wanted to argue, every instinct screaming against the idea of simply hiding, while danger circled so close to the people she had come to care for so deeply. But she understood, with painful clarity, that arguing now would only create a distraction Cale could not afford. Be careful, she said instead, meeting his eyes with fierce, unwavering intensity. All of you, come back to us. Something flickered warmly behind Cale's sharp gaze, despite the danger surrounding them. I intend to. Clara hurried the 3 pups back inside, barring the door securely behind her, just as Cale had instructed, though she remained close enough to the window to catch fragmented glimpses of movement through the narrow gap in the curtain. Outside, Cale moved swiftly toward the tree line, joined quickly by 2 additional guards, who had been stationed nearby in disguise. Their approach was careful, coordinated, each of them scanning the shadows with practiced, deadly focus. The attack, when it came, erupted with sudden, violent speed. Shapes burst from the darkness between the trees, moving too fast for ordinary eyes to track clearly, a blur of snarling motion and desperate confrontation. Clara pressed her hand against her mouth, stifling a gasp as she watched Cale meet the first attacker head-on, his movements sharp and controlled despite his injuries, driven by fierce determination to protect everything waiting inside that small house. Inside, the 3 pups pressed close together near her feet, their bodies trembling, their eyes fixed intently on the door, as though they could somehow sense every moment of the battle raging just beyond it. Rowan let out a low, anxious whine, pacing back and forth in agitated circles, while Finn pressed himself so tightly against Clara's leg that she could feel his rapid heartbeat through the thin fabric of her dress. It will be all right, she whispered, though she was far from certain of that promise herself. Your father is strong. He will protect us. The sounds outside continued, snarling and impact, and the occasional pained cry cutting sharply through the night air, each one sending a fresh wave of fear through Clara's chest. She had never witnessed true combat before, had never truly understood the danger Cale and his sons had been living with since the moment of the palace attack, and the reality of it now, so close and so violent, left her shaking, despite her best efforts to remain calm for the pups' sake. Then, abruptly, the sounds of battle shifted, the snarling growing more distant, as though the fight was being pushed back away from the house. Clara dared to peek through the gap in the curtain once more, and what she saw made her breath catch sharply in her throat. Cale stood at the edge of the tree line, breathing heavily but standing firm, 3 shapes lying motionless on the ground before him, while a 4th fled quickly into the deeper shadows of the forest, clearly recognizing the battle had turned decisively against them. Doran and the other guard moved quickly to secure the fallen attackers, though Clara noted with grim understanding that none of them appeared to be moving. Whatever had happened in those brief, violent moments, the immediate threat, at least, had been neutralized. Cale turned back toward the house, his expression a complicated mixture of exhaustion and fierce relief, and made his way slowly back across the garden. Clara unbarred the door the moment he reached it, rushing forward without thinking, her hands immediately searching for any new injuries despite his reassuring wave that he was unharmed. You are all right, she said, relief flooding through her voice. I am, Cale confirmed, though his gaze remained troubled even as he allowed her to check him over. But this changes things, Clara. Garrick knows precisely where we are now, beyond any doubt. He will not send only trackers next time. The weight of his words settled heavily over the small room, and even the 3 pups, sensing the shift in mood, grew quiet and still, watching their father with wide, anxious eyes. What do we do now? Clara asked quietly. Cale was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing options that felt increasingly limited given the circumstances. Finally he spoke, his voice heavy with reluctant resolve. We cannot remain here any longer. It is no longer safe for you, for the village, or for my sons. We return to the palace, immediately, regardless of the risks involved in traveling while injured. Tonight? Clara asked, startled by the sudden urgency. Before dawn, Cale confirmed. Garrick's remaining forces will need time to regroup and report back to him. That gives us a narrow window to move before he organizes a larger attack. Clara glanced toward the 3 pups, still healing, still far too young to fully understand the danger surrounding them, and felt a fierce, protective determination settle deep within her chest. Then let us prepare, she said firmly, whatever it takes to keep them safe. Cale studied her for a long moment, something profoundly grateful and unmistakably fond shining behind his tired eyes. You do not have to come with us, Clara, he said quietly. Once we reach the palace, you could return here, to your home, your life, away from all of this danger. Clara looked at the 3 pups pressed close around her, at Cale standing wounded but resolute before her, and shook her head firmly. I found them for a reason, she said. I am not walking away now, not when they still need me, and not when. She hesitated only briefly, before continuing, her voice softening. Not when I have come to care about all of you far more than I expected to. Cale's expression shifted into something warm and unguarded, a rare, genuine smile, breaking through the exhaustion and tension of the night. Then we leave together, he said simply, all of us. Within the hour, the small household had gathered what few belongings could be carried quickly, prepared the pups as best they could for the journey ahead, and set out into the darkness toward the distant wolf kingdom, leaving behind the quiet, simple life Clara had known for so long, in exchange for an uncertain, dangerous future she had chosen without hesitation. Behind them, deep within the shadowed forest, Garrick received word of his failed ambush with cold, calculating fury, already planning his next move with grim determination. The chase, it seemed, was far from finished. The journey through the forest tested every ounce of courage Clara possessed. They traveled mostly under cover of darkness, moving quickly along narrow paths that Cale and his guards knew intimately, pausing only when absolutely necessary to rest the pups or check for signs of pursuit. Clara carried Finn most of the way, his small body pressed trustingly against her chest, while Rowan and Oscar trotted close beside Cale, occasionally glancing back toward her as though reassuring themselves she remained near. Despite the danger surrounding them, Clara found herself oddly amazed by the beauty of the forest she had feared her entire life. Tall, ancient trees stretching high above them, moonlight filtering through the leaves in delicate silver patterns, the distant sound of a stream, somewhere beyond the path they followed. You are seeing it differently now, Cale observed quietly during one of their brief rest stops, noticing the way her eyes moved thoughtfully across their surroundings. I always believed this forest held only danger, Clara admitted. I never imagined it could also hold something this beautiful. Many things are more complicated than the stories we grow up believing, Cale said, his gaze lingering on her with quiet meaning. I am learning that lesson myself, more than I expected to. Their journey continued through the remainder of the night, and by the time the first light of dawn began filtering through the trees, the towering walls of the Wolf Kingdom's palace finally came into view, ancient stone structures rising impressively against the pale morning sky. Clara felt a fresh wave of nervousness settle over her as they approached the palace gates, painfully aware of how out of place she must appear, a simple human flower seller walking alongside the Alpha King and his 3 young sons. The guards stationed at the entrance straightened immediately upon recognizing Cale, though their eyes widened with poorly concealed surprise at the sight of Clara and the pups accompanying him. Send word immediately, Cale instructed one of the guards firmly. My sons have been found and returned safely. Increase security throughout the palace grounds without delay, and summon Edmund the moment he arrives. The guard hurried to comply, and within moments, news of the royal heir's safe return began spreading rapidly through the palace, met with a mixture of relief and cautious celebration among the staff and remaining court members loyal to Cale. Clara followed Cale through the grand corridors of the palace, feeling increasingly overwhelmed by the sheer scale and unfamiliarity of her new surroundings. Ornate tapestries lined the walls, depicting scenes from the kingdom's long history, while polished stone floors echoed softly beneath their footsteps. They were shown to a private chamber, where a healer immediately began examining the 3 pups, along with tending more thoroughly to Cale's remaining injuries. Clara hovered nearby throughout the examination, unable to fully relax despite the healer's reassurances that all 3 boys were recovering well and simply needed continued rest and patience before attempting to shift back into their human forms. It was during this quiet moment of relief that Clara first became aware of the curious, judgmental stares directed her way from several members of the palace staff passing through the corridor outside the chamber. They are not accustomed to seeing humans within these walls, Cale explained quietly, noticing her discomfort. Please, do not take their curiosity personally. It will fade with time. Clara nodded, though the weight of those stares lingered uncomfortably in her mind throughout the following days. As the pups continued recovering under the palace's careful attention, Clara found herself navigating an entirely new and often confusing world, filled with unfamiliar customs, formal titles, and a complex web of political relationships she barely understood. Edmund, thankfully, took it upon himself to guide her gently through the basics of court etiquette, patiently explaining traditions and expectations she would need to understand if she intended to remain within the palace long term. "Many members of the court will not welcome your presence easily," Edmund warned her honestly during one of their private conversations. "There is a long history of distrust between our kind and humans, one that will not disappear simply because you helped protect the young princes." "I do not need their approval," Clara said, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed her expression despite her firm words. "I only wish to see the boys safe and happy." "A noble goal," Edmund agreed, "though I suspect your reasons for remaining here extend beyond concern for the princes alone." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, uncertain how to respond to Edmund's gentle observation, though she suspected he already understood exactly what, or rather who, had captured her heart during their time together. Meanwhile, Cale found himself increasingly occupied with the demands of ruling a kingdom still reeling from the recent attack, coordinating investigations into which members of his court might have assisted Garrick's forces, while simultaneously working to strengthen palace security against any future attempts on his sons' lives. Despite the overwhelming demands on his time, he made a point of visiting Clara and the boys every single day, often finding small moments of genuine peace and warmth amid the chaos surrounding his responsibilities as king. "You seem tired," Clara observed one evening, noticing the exhaustion etched clearly across his features as he settled into a chair beside the boys' resting quarters. "Ruling a kingdom while hunting for hidden traitors leaves little time for rest," Cale admitted with a weary smile. "Though moments like this," he added, glancing warmly toward her, "make the burden considerably lighter to bear." Clara felt her heart flutter at his words, the warmth between them growing steadily stronger, despite the uncertainty and danger still surrounding their situation. Their quiet moment was interrupted by a soft, hesitant voice from across the room. "Papa." Both Clara and Cale turned immediately toward the sound, hearts stopping simultaneously as they realized what they had just heard. Standing near the window, in place of the small wolf pup who had been resting there only moments before, stood a small boy, no older than 5, with dark tousled hair and wide, uncertain eyes that mirrored Cale's own perfectly. Oscar had finally shifted back into his human form. Cale crossed the room in an instant, dropping to his knees before his son, tears of overwhelming relief and joy filling his eyes as he pulled the small boy into a fierce, protective embrace. "My boy," Cale whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "My brave, wonderful boy." Clara watched the reunion with tears streaming freely down her own cheeks, overwhelmed by the beautiful, emotional moment unfolding before her. Beside them, Rowan and Finn remained in their wolf forms still, watching their brother and father with wide, hopeful eyes, as though silently wishing for the courage to attempt the same transformation themselves. "It is all right," Clara said softly, kneeling down beside the remaining 2 pups, gently stroking their fur with comforting reassurance. "You will find your way back too, when you are ready. There is no need to rush." As if responding directly to her gentle encouragement, Finn shifted next, his small wolf form dissolving into that of an equally small boy, with the same torn ear scar now visible faintly against his cheek instead. He immediately crawled into Clara's lap, burying his face against her shoulder with a relieved, exhausted sigh. "You found us," Finn whispered against her shoulder, his voice small and trusting. "You kept us safe." Clara wrapped her arms tightly around him, overwhelmed by emotion she could barely contain. "Always," she promised softly, "for as long as you need me." Rowan remained the only one still in his wolf form, watching the emotional scene unfold with quiet, thoughtful eyes, though even he seemed visibly more relaxed, more secure than he had been throughout their entire journey. Cale looked up from his embrace with Oscar, his gaze meeting Clara's with profound gratitude and unmistakable affection. "Thank you," he said simply, though the depth of emotion behind those 2 words conveyed far more than any lengthy speech could have expressed. "You do not need to thank me," Clara replied gently. I did what anyone with a heart would have done. No, Cale said, shaking his head slowly, his voice firm with quiet conviction. Not anyone would have done what you did, Clara. You saw 3 frightened, wounded creatures with nothing to offer you in return, and you chose kindness anyway, without hesitation, without expecting anything back. That is rare, precious, and worthy of far more gratitude than simple words can express. The warmth in his gaze left little doubt about the depth of feeling growing steadily between them, though neither of them had yet found the courage to speak those feelings aloud. For now, it was enough simply to sit together in that quiet room, surrounded by the sound of children's laughter finally returning, after days of fear and uncertainty, cherishing this precious moment of safety and healing, before the challenges still awaiting them beyond those walls demanded their attention once more. News of the young prince's safe return and their successful shift back into human form spread quickly throughout the palace, bringing relief to many, but not to everyone. Within days, whispers began circulating among certain members of the court, questioning why a human woman had been granted such close access to the royal children, and more pointedly, why she continued to remain within the palace walls, despite the princes no longer requiring constant care. Clara first became fully aware of the depth of this resistance during a formal gathering held to celebrate the prince's return, an event she attended reluctantly at Cale's gentle insistence. You belong here as much as anyone, Cale had reassured her earlier that evening, straightening the collar of the simple but elegant dress the palace seamstresses had prepared for her. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise. Despite his encouragement, Clara felt the weight of dozens of curious, skeptical stares the moment she entered the grand hall, whispered conversations, pausing abruptly as she passed, only to resume in hushed, pointed tones the moment she moved beyond earshot. One particular exchange, overheard quite by accident near a quiet corner of the hall, left her feeling especially unsettled. A human, raised as though she belongs among royalty, one voice muttered disapprovingly. It is an insult to generations of tradition. Perhaps, another voice replied thoughtfully, though one cannot deny she risked her own safety to protect the young princes when they needed it most. That does not erase what she is, the first voice countered firmly. Sentiment cannot be allowed to undermine the stability of this kingdom's bloodline. Clara stepped away quietly before either speaker noticed her presence, her chest tight, with a complicated mixture of hurt and quiet, stubborn resolve. She had not asked for recognition or reward when she first hid 3 frightened pups in her home, and she certainly had not anticipated becoming the center of such heated political debate, simply for choosing kindness over fear. Later that evening, once the formal gathering had concluded, Cale found her standing alone on a quiet balcony, overlooking the palace gardens, her expression thoughtful and slightly troubled beneath the soft glow of moonlight. You heard them, Cale said gently, joining her at the railing. It was not a question. Word travels quickly within these walls, it seems, Clara replied with a small, tired smile. I do not blame them entirely for their concerns. I imagine trust between our 2 worlds has been broken many times over the years. That does not make their cruelty acceptable, Cale said firmly, his jaw tightening with quiet anger. You have done nothing to deserve such judgment. Perhaps not, Clara agreed, but I understand fear, Cale, even when it is misplaced. I grew up hearing stories about your kind that painted you as monsters, and yet here you stand, kind and thoughtful and nothing like those old tales suggested. Perhaps it will simply take time for your court to learn the same lesson I have. Cale studied her closely, admiration clear in his gaze despite the frustration still simmering beneath his calm exterior. You possess remarkable patience, considering the unkindness directed your way. I have had practice, Clara said simply. Life rarely offers easy paths, and I learned long ago that patience often accomplishes more than anger ever could. Their quiet conversation was interrupted by the soft padding of small feet against the stone floor of the balcony. Rowan, still the only one of the 3 brothers who had not yet managed to shift back into his human form, approached hesitantly, pressing himself gently against Clara's leg. Still finding your courage? Clara asked softly, kneeling down to stroke his fur with familiar tenderness. Rowan whined softly, his dark eyes filled with something that looked remarkably like frustration and quiet determination combined. There is no need to rush, Cale reassured his son gently, kneeling down beside them both. You will find your way back when you are ready, exactly as your brothers did. Over the following weeks, Clara settled gradually into an unfamiliar but increasingly comfortable rhythm within palace life. She continued caring for the boys daily, watching proudly as Finn and Oscar grew steadily more confident in their human forms, filling the palace halls with laughter and playful energy that seemed to lighten the mood of even the most skeptical staff members over time. Slowly, cautiously, small pockets of acceptance began forming among those who witnessed Clara's genuine devotion to the princes firsthand. The kitchen staff, initially wary, grew fond of her polite gratitude and genuine appreciation for their efforts. The healers respected her practical knowledge of herbal remedies, occasionally seeking her advice on treatments she had learned growing up in the human village. Even some of the guards, gruff and initially dismissive, found themselves quietly impressed by her fierce protectiveness whenever the boys' safety seemed even slightly at risk. Yet despite this gradual, hard-won acceptance among the palace staff, a significant faction within Kale's formal court remained openly resistant to her continued presence, led primarily by a stern, calculating noble named Lord Halvard, whose influence within the kingdom's political circles remained considerable despite Kale's personal disapproval of his views. "The kingdom grows uneasy, my king," Halvard stated bluntly during one particularly tense council meeting, his tone carefully respectful yet undeniably pointed. "Rumors continue to spread regarding your personal attachment to the human woman. Such rumors weaken perceptions of stability, particularly following such a vulnerable period for our kingdom." Kale's expression remained carefully neutral, though the tightening of his jaw betrayed his growing irritation. "Clara risked her own life protecting my sons, when this kingdom's own security failed to prevent their abduction in the first place. I would think the court might focus its concerns on identifying the traitor who assisted Garrick's forces, rather than questioning the character of the woman who saved our future heirs." Halvard inclined his head slightly, though his expression remained unconvinced. "Perhaps both concerns deserve equal attention, my king." The unresolved tension between honoring Clara's sacrifice and appeasing the court's traditional expectations continued weighing heavily on Kale throughout the following days, though he remained steadfast in his refusal to distance himself from her, regardless of the political pressure mounting against him. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to either Clara or Kale, the investigation into the palace traitor responsible for assisting Garrick's initial attack had quietly narrowed its focus toward a surprising and deeply troubling suspect, one whose betrayal, once fully revealed, would shake the foundations of the court far more severely than any rumor regarding Clara's presence ever could. The threads of danger, political tension, and long-buried secrets were steadily drawing closer together, building toward a confrontation that would test the strength of the kingdom and the growing bond between Clara and Kale, more severely than anything they had yet faced. Edmund arrived at Kale's private study late one evening, his expression grave in a way that immediately set Kale on edge. "You have found something," Kale said, setting aside the reports he had been reviewing. "I believe so," Edmund confirmed, closing the door carefully behind him before continuing. "The investigation into the night of the attack has finally uncovered a pattern too consistent to be coincidence. Someone disabled the Northern Gate's warning system just before the assault began, and only a handful of individuals possessed the specific knowledge required to bypass that particular mechanism without triggering an alarm." "Who?" Kale asked, though something in his chest already tightened with dread, sensing the answer would not be an easy one to accept. Edmund hesitated only briefly before answering. "Lord Halvard's personal aide, a man named Cedric, has been seen meeting privately with unfamiliar individuals near the kingdom's border on at least 3 separate occasions over the past month, always under the cover of darkness, always avoiding the usual patrol routes." Kale's expression darkened considerably. "And Halvard himself?" "There is no direct evidence linking him personally, not yet," Edmund admitted carefully. "But given his aide's involvement, and considering Halvard's outspoken opposition to your continued leadership following recent, personal choices, it seems unlikely he remained entirely unaware of his own aide's activities." Kale absorbed this information silently, a heavy weight settling over him as he considered the implications. Halvard had sat across from him in countless council meetings, had voiced his objections to Clara's presence openly and repeatedly, yet Kale had never once suspected the man's opposition extended into outright treason against the crown itself. We need concrete proof before taking action, Kale said finally, his voice carefully controlled despite the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. Accusing a member of the court without absolute certainty could fracture what little stability remains within this kingdom. Agreed, Edmund said. I have already arranged for closer surveillance on Cedric's movements. If he attempts contact with Garrick's forces again, we will be positioned to catch him in the act, and hopefully uncover the full extent of Halvard's involvement in the process. As the investigation continued quietly in the background, palace life proceeded with a deceptive sense of calm, punctuated by moments of genuine joy that helped ease the underlying tension weighing on everyone aware of the ongoing threat. Rowan finally managed his own transformation nearly 3 weeks after his brothers, emerging one sunny afternoon in the palace gardens as a small boy with the same watchful, thoughtful eyes he had carried throughout his time as a wolf pup. Clara had been the first to witness the transformation, having spent the afternoon sitting quietly beside him near the garden's fountain, offering the same patient companionship she had provided him since the very beginning. "There you are," she said softly, tears of happiness gathering in her eyes, as she gently helped the newly human boy find his balance on unfamiliar legs. "I knew you would find your way back when you were ready." Rowan looked up at her with wide, wondering eyes, then wrapped his small arms tightly around her neck in a fierce, grateful embrace. "Thank you for waiting," he whispered, his voice slightly hoarse from disuse. "For not giving up on me, even when it took longer than my brothers." "I would have waited as long as it took," Clara promised, holding him close. "Every single one of you is worth that patience, and so much more." That evening, for the first time since their arrival at the palace, all 3 boys sat together at dinner in their human forms, laughing and chattering excitedly about their day, while Kale and Clara watched with matching expressions of overwhelming love and gratitude. "We did this," Kale said quietly, reaching for Clara's hand beneath the table, his fingers intertwining gently with hers. "Together." "We did," Clara agreed, squeezing his hand warmly, her heart swelling with emotion as she watched the boys' joy filling the room around them. Their peaceful moment, however, would prove short-lived. Later that same night, as the palace settled into quiet darkness, a guard stationed near the northern gate spotted movement along the outer wall, immediately raising the alarm. Within minutes, palace guards had converged on the location, catching Cedric in the act of signaling toward the tree line beyond the palace boundary, a lantern in his hand flashing a coded pattern into the darkness. He was apprehended quickly, though not before managing to send whatever signal he intended, a fact that filled Kale with immediate, sharp concern the moment Edmund delivered the news to him personally. "He was communicating with someone waiting in the forest," Edmund reported grimly, having personally overseen Cedric's initial questioning. Under pressure, he confessed to acting under Halvard's direct instructions, providing information about palace security, in exchange for promises of increased power and influence, once Garrick successfully claimed the throne. "And the signal he sent tonight?" Kale asked, dread coiling tightly in his stomach. Edmund's expression grew even more troubled. "He claims it was meant to confirm that tomorrow's ceremony, the one honoring your son's safe return, would proceed as publicly announced. Garrick, it seems, intends to use the large public gathering as an opportunity to make one final, decisive attempt against your sons." Kale's blood ran cold at the implication. The ceremony had been carefully planned as a public celebration, an opportunity to reassure the kingdom of stability following the recent turmoil, drawing nobles, citizens, and dignitaries from across the entire territory to witness the young princes presented safely before their people for the first time since the attack. If Garrick intended to strike during such a public, heavily attended event, the potential for chaos and tragedy would be catastrophic. "Cancel it," Kale said immediately, his voice sharp with urgent decision. "We cannot risk." "My king," Edmund interrupted gently but firmly, "canceling now, mere hours before the ceremony, would only confirm to the entire kingdom that something is deeply wrong. It could create the very panic and instability Garrick hopes to exploit, regardless of whether he manages an actual attack. We need a different approach." Kale paced the length of his study, his mind racing through options, each one carrying significant risk regardless of the path chosen. "Then we proceed," he said finally, his voice firm, despite the fear clearly evident beneath his controlled exterior. "But we prepare for battle disguised as celebration." Triple the guard presence throughout the grounds, position our best warriors strategically among the crowd, and above all, ensure my sons and Clara remain surrounded by protection at every single moment. Edmund nodded firmly. I will see to it personally, my king. We will not fail them again. As dawn approached, casting pale golden light across the palace grounds, where preparations for the ceremony continued, despite the danger now known to be looming, Clara found herself standing quietly beside Cale, in his private study, having just been informed of everything Edmund had uncovered. We could still choose not to attend, she said quietly, though she already suspected what his answer would be. The boy's safety matters more than any public celebration. If we hide now, Cale said gently, though his voice carried the weight of a difficult decision already made. Garrick wins, regardless of whether he manages to strike today. He will have proven that fear can control this kingdom's every action. I will not allow that, Clara, not for myself, and not for my son's future as rulers who must eventually stand strong before their people. Clara studied him for a long moment, understanding the impossible weight of leadership pressing down upon him, before nodding slowly in reluctant agreement. Then we face this together, she said firmly. Exactly as we have faced everything since the moment I found those 3 pups hiding beneath my flowers. Cale reached for her hand, pressing a gentle, grateful kiss against her knuckles, his eyes conveying a depth of emotion far beyond simple words. Together, he agreed softly, always, from this moment forward. Outside, the palace grounds continued bustling with final preparations for the ceremony, unaware that the peaceful celebration planned to honor the kingdom's healing was about to become the setting for its most dangerous confrontation yet. The ceremony grounds had been transformed overnight into a scene of vibrant celebration, colorful banners stretching between tall pillars, long tables arranged with carefully prepared food, and a raised platform positioned prominently at the center, where the royal family would soon stand before their gathered citizens. Beneath the festive surface, however, palace guards disguised as servers, musicians, and ordinary attendees moved carefully through the crowd, their eyes constantly scanning for any sign of danger, their weapons hidden but readily accessible beneath simple ceremonial clothing. Clara stood near the edge of the platform, dressed in an elegant gown provided by the palace, her hand resting protectively on Finn's shoulder, while Oscar and Rowan stood close beside Cale, all 3 boys dressed in formal attire that made them look remarkably like miniature versions of their father. Stay close to me, Clara whispered to the boys, her heart pounding despite her outwardly composed expression. No matter what happens, stay close. The 3 boys nodded solemnly, sensing the tension despite their young age, their earlier excitement about the celebration, tempered now by an instinctive awareness that something serious was expected to happen. Cale stepped forward as the ceremony began, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd as he addressed his people for the first time since the attack on his sons. 3 months ago, he began, his voice steady and strong despite the danger he knew lurked somewhere within the celebrating crowd. This kingdom faced a threat that struck at the very heart of our future. Today I stand before you grateful beyond words to present my sons, safe, healthy, and stronger than ever, thanks to the courage of those who protected them when this kingdom's own defenses failed. He gestured toward Clara, drawing the attention of the entire crowd toward her, an act of public acknowledgement that sent a fresh wave of nervous energy through her chest, despite her attempt to remain composed. This woman, Cale continued, a human, from beyond our borders, found my sons frightened, wounded, and hiding for their lives, and chose to protect them without hesitation, without knowledge of who they truly were, and without expectation of any reward. Her courage, her kindness, exemplifies exactly the values this kingdom should aspire to honor, regardless of the boundaries our history has drawn between our peoples. A mixture of applause and murmured conversation rippled through the crowd, some clearly moved by Cale's words, others still visibly skeptical despite the public praise. Clara caught sight of Lord Halvard, standing rigidly near the front of the gathering, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes carried a coldness that sent an uneasy chill down her spine. It was in that exact moment, as Cale continued his address, that chaos erupted. A group of disguised attackers, positioned strategically throughout the crowd, suddenly revealed themselves, shifting rapidly into their wolf forms, amid startled screams, and panicked scattering from the surrounding citizens. Garrick himself emerged from among them, larger and more menacing than Clara had ever imagined, his golden eyes locking immediately onto Cale and the three boys with predatory focus. "Guards!" Cale shouted immediately, his own transformation beginning even as he moved to shield his sons, his human form melting rapidly into the powerful, formidable shape of the Alpha King's true wolf nature. Chaos erupted across the ceremony grounds as palace guards revealed their hidden weapons, engaging Garrick's attackers in fierce, desperate combat, while terrified citizens fled toward the safety of the surrounding buildings. Clara grabbed the three boys immediately, pulling them behind the relative shelter of the overturned ceremonial platform, her heart pounding with terror as she shielded their small bodies with her own. "Stay down," she commanded fiercely, her voice steady, despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Whatever happens, stay hidden." Through a gap in the shattered platform, Clara watched with horrified fascination as Cale fought Garrick directly, the two powerful wolves clashing with ferocious, calculated precision, each movement carrying the weight of a battle that would determine far more than simply their personal survival. Edmund fought valiantly nearby, coordinating the palace guards with practiced efficiency despite the chaos surrounding them, gradually turning the tide of battle as more guards arrived to reinforce the initial defense. Then, through the chaos, Clara spotted something that made her blood run cold. Lord Halvard, rather than fleeing to safety alongside the other panicked nobles, was moving with deliberate purpose toward a section of the crowd where several confused, frightened children had become separated from their families in the chaos. Understanding dawned on her, with horrifying clarity. Halvard intended to use the chaos as cover, either to eliminate witnesses to his betrayal, or perhaps to create additional chaos that would further destabilize the kingdom, regardless of Garrick's success or failure in the main confrontation. Without fully considering the danger to herself, Clara made a swift decision. "Stay here," she instructed the three boys firmly, ensuring they were tucked securely behind solid cover. "Do not move until I return." She rushed toward the frightened children, positioning herself quickly between them and Halvard's approaching figure, her earlier fear transformed into fierce, protective determination. "Move aside," Halvard commanded coldly, his earlier careful mask of neutrality completely abandoned now, revealing the calculating cruelty beneath. "No," Clara said firmly, standing her ground despite every instinct urging her to flee. "I know what you have done, Lord Halvard. Your betrayal ends here." Halvard's expression twisted with cold fury at her open accusation. "You understand nothing, human. This kingdom requires strength, not sentiment, not weakness disguised as compassion. Garrick understands this. Once he claims the throne, true stability will finally return." "By murdering children?" Clara demanded, refusing to move despite his advancing steps. "That is not stability. That is simply cruelty, given a convenient excuse." Halvard's hand moved swiftly toward a hidden blade at his side, his intentions suddenly, terrifyingly clear. Before he could act, however, a blur of motion intercepted him from the side. Doran, the guard who had first warned them of danger back at Clara's home, tackling Halvard forcefully to the ground before he could complete his intended action. "Treason against the crown," Doran growled fiercely, quickly restraining the struggling noble with practiced efficiency. "You will answer for this before the full council, Halvard, and for whatever hand you had in endangering the royal princes as well." Clara sagged with relief, quickly ushering the frightened children towards safety, before rushing back to check on the three boys still hidden behind the shattered platform, finding them exactly where she had left them, frightened but unharmed. Meanwhile, the main battle had begun turning decisively in Cale's favor, his warriors gradually overwhelming Garrick's remaining forces through coordinated, disciplined combat. Garrick himself, recognizing the shifting tide, attempted a desperate final assault directly toward Cale, only to be met with fierce, calculated defense that finally brought the confrontation to its decisive conclusion. With Garrick's forces defeated and scattered, and Halvard captured and exposed as the traitor responsible for enabling the original attack, the ceremony grounds slowly began settling back into uneasy, exhausted calm. The celebration transformed dramatically into the site of the kingdom's most significant victory in generations. Cale, breathing heavily but triumphant, shifted back into his human form and rushed immediately toward Clara and his sons, relief and love flooding through his exhausted features as he confirmed they remained safe and unharmed. "You are all right," he said, pulling all four of them into a fierce, grateful embrace. "All of you." "We are," Clara confirmed, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks as she returned his embrace warmly. "Thanks to your courage, and honestly, thanks to quite a bit of luck as well." Cale pulled back slightly, studying her with profound admiration and gratitude. "I heard what you did, confronting Halvard directly to protect those children. That was remarkably brave, Clara, even by the standards of this kingdom's fiercest warriors." "I could not simply stand by," Clara said simply, "not when I had the chance to help." Around them, the remaining crowd, having witnessed both the danger and the courage displayed by so many during the chaotic confrontation, began slowly emerging from their hiding places, their earlier fear gradually transforming into cautious relief and growing admiration for the woman who had proven her loyalty and courage so decisively before their very eyes. The battle had been won, the traitor exposed, and the immediate threat to the kingdom's future finally, decisively eliminated. Yet as Cale looked around at the damaged ceremony grounds, at his exhausted but triumphant guards, and finally back toward Clara and his three sons standing safely beside him, he understood that this victory represented far more than simply surviving another attack. It represented the beginning of something entirely new, a future built not on old fears and rigid traditions, but on courage, compassion, and the kind of unexpected transformative love that had first brought a simple flower seller and three frightened wolf pups together on an ordinary evening that had changed absolutely everything. 3 weeks passed following the confrontation at the ceremony grounds, weeks filled with careful rebuilding, both of the physical damage left behind and the deeper wounds of trust and stability that had been shaken throughout the kingdom. Lord Halvard, along with his aide Cedric, faced formal judgment before the full council, their treason laid bare through overwhelming evidence gathered during the investigation. Their punishment, decided through careful deliberation, ensured they would never again hold influence or position within the kingdom's political structure, a resolution that brought quiet relief to Cale, who had long respected the importance of stability, but never at the cost of protecting those he loved. Garrick, badly wounded during the confrontation, was captured attempting to flee the kingdom's borders days after the battle, his remaining forces scattered and demoralized without his leadership. His capture marked the definitive end of the threat that had haunted Cale's family since the very night his sons were first taken from their nursery. With the immediate dangers finally resolved, the kingdom slowly began settling into a new, more hopeful rhythm, one shaped significantly by the courage and compassion Clara had demonstrated so consistently throughout the entire ordeal. The change in public perception toward her was gradual but undeniable. Citizens who had witnessed her bravery during the ceremony spoke of it with genuine admiration, their stories spreading throughout the kingdom and slowly softening the deeply rooted skepticism that had once made her presence within the palace so contentious. Even members of the court who had previously aligned themselves with Halvard's more traditional views found themselves reconsidering their positions in light of everything that had transpired. "You have accomplished something remarkable," Edmund observed one afternoon, finding Clara in the palace gardens where she had taken to spending her quiet moments among the flowers she had grown to recognize as strikingly similar to those she once sold in the human market. "Changing hearts and minds is rarely a swift process, yet you have managed it more effectively in these past months than decades of careful diplomacy ever achieved." "I never intended to change anything," Clara replied honestly, tending gently to a cluster of blooming roses. "I simply wanted to protect 3 frightened creatures who needed help." "Perhaps that is precisely why it worked," Edmund said thoughtfully. "Genuine kindness, offered without calculation or expectation, often accomplishes what careful strategy cannot." Their conversation was interrupted by the excited arrival of the 3 princes, now fully comfortable moving between their human and wolf forms, chasing each other playfully through the garden paths, with the boundless energy typical of children who had finally found lasting safety and happiness. "Clara!" Finn called out eagerly, rushing toward her with a small bouquet of wildflowers he had gathered himself. "I picked these for you, just like the ones from your old cart." Clara accepted the slightly crushed but heartfelt gift with genuine delight, pulling the boy into a warm, affectionate embrace. "They are absolutely beautiful, Finn. Thank you." Rowan and Oscar arrived shortly after, eager to share their own stories from their recent lessons with the palace tutors, their easy affection and trust toward Clara, evident in every interaction, a stark and beautiful contrast to the frightened, wounded creatures she had first discovered hiding beneath her flowers so many months ago. Later that evening, as the sun began setting behind the palace's tall towers, Cale found Clara once again in the gardens, watching the boys play together in the fading golden light, with an expression of quiet, contented joy. "May I join you?" he asked softly, settling beside her on the stone bench without waiting for her answer, though his gentle smile suggested he already knew it would be welcomed. "Always," Clara replied warmly, leaning slightly into his familiar, comforting presence. They sat together in comfortable silence for several long moments, watching the boys' playful antics, before Cale finally spoke, his voice carrying a nervous energy she had rarely witnessed from the normally composed king. "Clara," he began carefully, "these past months have shown me something I never expected to discover again after losing my son's mother all those years ago. You have brought warmth, joy, and genuine happiness back into this family in ways I had almost forgotten were possible." Clara turned to face him fully, her heart beginning to race at the sincerity evident in his voice and expression. "You have given me far more than I ever expected when I found those 3 pups hiding in my cart," she replied softly. "A family, a purpose, and honestly, Cale, feelings I never anticipated experiencing again after everything I lost in my own life." Cale reached gently for her hand, his thumb tracing soft, reassuring circles against her knuckles as he continued, his voice steady, despite the clear vulnerability behind his words. "I know the challenges we have faced together, the resistance from the court, the dangers we have overcome, but through all of it, my feelings for you have only grown stronger, deeper, more certain with each passing day. Clara, I do not wish to simply continue as we are, grateful companions bound together by circumstance alone. I want to build a future with you, openly, completely, as partners in every sense." Clara's breath caught as understanding dawned fully, her eyes filling with happy, overwhelmed tears as Cale slowly lowered himself before her, his expression filled with hopeful vulnerability, rarely seen from someone holding such powerful responsibility. "Clara," he continued, his voice thick with emotion, "will you do me the honor of becoming my mate, my equal partner in ruling this kingdom, and most importantly, the mother my sons already consider you to be, in every way that matters?" Tears streamed freely down Clara's cheeks as she nodded eagerly, unable to find adequate words to express the overwhelming joy flooding through her entire being. "Yes," she finally managed, laughing through her happy tears. "Yes, absolutely yes, Cale." Their joyful moment was immediately interrupted by 3 excited voices, the boys having clearly overheard enough of the conversation to understand its significance, rushing forward to wrap themselves enthusiastically around both Cale and Clara in an exuberant, overlapping embrace. "Does this mean you are really going to be our mother now?" Oscar asked hopefully, his wide eyes shining with genuine excitement. "If you 3 will have me," Clara replied warmly, pulling all 3 boys close against her chest, alongside Cale, "then yes, absolutely, with all my heart." "We already do," Rowan said simply, his usually reserved nature giving way to open, unguarded happiness. "You have been our mother since that very first night, Clara, long before either of us understood what that word truly meant." The following weeks brought joyful preparations throughout the kingdom, as news of Cale's engagement to Clara spread rapidly, met now overwhelmingly with genuine celebration, rather than the skepticism that had once surrounded her presence. The formal ceremony, when it finally took place beneath a sky filled with brilliant stars, brought together citizens from across the entire kingdom, along with several curious representatives from the neighboring human villages, eager to witness the historic union between their 2 previously divided worlds. Clara stood beside Cale as vows were exchanged, dressed in an elegant gown that beautifully honored both her simple human origins and her new role within the Wolf Kingdom's royal family, her heart overflowing with a happiness she had never dared imagine possible during those long, difficult years spent alone in her small cottage at the edge of the forest. As the ceremony concluded and celebrations began throughout the palace grounds, Clara found herself standing quietly at the edge of the festivities, watching Cale laugh warmly alongside their 3 sons, the family she had never expected to find now complete and thriving before her very eyes. Meg, who had traveled from the human village specifically to witness the historic occasion, approached Clara with a warm, knowing smile. "You truly have found something extraordinary here," Meg observed, glancing around at the joyful celebration surrounding them. "I found it by simply choosing kindness, even when it seemed foolish or dangerous," Clara replied, her gaze drifting fondly toward her new family. "I suppose sometimes the smallest, most ordinary choices lead us toward the most extraordinary futures." As the celebration continued late into the night, filled with laughter, dancing, and the joyful energy of a kingdom finally at peace, Clara reflected quietly on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. From a simple flower seller struggling to survive at the edge of a forest she once feared, to the beloved queen of a kingdom she now called home, her story stood as powerful proof that even the smallest acts of compassion could ultimately reshape entire destinies. The flower cart that had once carried nothing more than simple wildflowers for sale now stood proudly displayed within the palace gardens, a cherished reminder of the humble beginning that had led to such profound, unexpected happiness. And every single day, as Clara walked those same garden paths alongside her husband and 3 beloved sons, she found herself endlessly grateful for the frightened, wounded pups who had once chosen her cart as their hiding place, forever changing the course of her life in ways she could never have imagined, yet would never trade for anything else in the entire world.